can you escape mass psychosis? That is a work in progress. However, I can give you the first step, and that is understanding mass psychosis. That is why I created a structure of mass psychosis regarding this ongoing inhumane phenomenon. Now, what does mass psychosis actually mean? It basically translates to society collectively believing something that is not true. And that it can be because they are misinformed and they actually believe false information without knowing that information is false. Or it can be on purpose, because society chooses to believe something that they know it is false because it is convenient to them. In some cases, society even makes up that information in order to support it, in order to believe it. So not only it knows that it is false, but it makes the information up itself. And that is the case regarding this phenomenon. Behind me, I created a graph which shows the structure in which society's delusional system was made up. Now, I know that this looks very complicated, but I'll break it down, and it's actually very easy. Here we have mass psychosis. This is the central point of society's delusional system, and it contains the convenient delusions of society. That means that at its central point, the delusional system of society contains what society wants to be true. It's convenient delusions. They would want that to be reality. And at the central of this delusional system, it's me. However, not actually me, but the version of me that society wants to be true. And that version has nothing to do with who I actually am, but with who society wants me to be. So that who society wants me to be, based on what is convenient to it, is the central point of society's delusional system. That is the starting point from which society built up its delusional system. Why did it do that? Well, it has to do with all the other aspects of the creation of this mass psychosis, like phenomenon in which the government stripped me of some of my fundamental human rights, and then society exploited that vulnerability for an expected reward or for other psychopathic reasons and made up false stories about me. However, it did not do that in a random manner. It did that in a very structured way. That is present here on the board. And why was that? Because the people who guided society in its action of building up this delusional system rewarded their behavior accordingly. So those people rewarded society and the specific members of society who made up specific false stories. And every time, and it conditioned society to make up those specific false stories in order to build up a convenient delusional system for these people who controlled the environment in which the delusional system was formed, and for the rest of society once society became involved and guilty of the same actions of those as those people. And I know that sounds complicated, but it's very simple and it has been explained in multiple other videos. However, this specific aspect is not the main point of this video. What is the main point of this video is the structure in which society built up its delusional system. So we're starting with BP1. What is BP1? It is behavior pattern 1. So behavior pattern 1 is not actually a story, it's just a behavior pattern. However, BP1, behavior pattern 1, is at the core of an entire series of false stories. BP2, behavior pattern 2, is at the core of another series of false stories, and so on. Society's delusional system is made up with false series of stories which contain key behavior patterns at their core. So we have a segment of society's delusional system and the entire segment contains the same behavior patterns in all its stories. We have another segment, another series of false stories, and this specific series of false stories is another behavior pattern at the core of all stories. So I'll give an example. Behavior pattern 1, let's say that behavior pattern 1 consists of sexually harassing girls. That is one behavior pattern, and that is BP1, behavior pattern 1. What we have here are a list of stories that all, 100% of them, have BP1 as their core element. That means that all the stories contain the action of sexually harassing girls one way or another. Now, this BP1, this file series that can be referred to as BP1, has other subsegments within itself. So that means that besides having that behavior pattern at its core, there could be other behavior patterns at the core of specific subsegments of the larger file series. So for example, there could be BP 1.1 in which the sexual harassment always includes the element bottom. And then that is a specific segment of BP1, a subsegment of BP1. And BP 1.2 can contain the element breast. And there will be sexual harassment that includes the element breast. And there will be a specific subsegment. BP 1.3 will be sexual harassment, which also includes a non-existent apology that other people made up afterward in order to address the non-existent action presented by the core behavior pattern. So that means that people made up non-existent apologies to address the non-existent behavior pattern that was never exhibited. But that is part of a specific subsegment of BP1. So in the bigger file series of BP1, there are smaller subsegments that have additional specific characteristics. And when you take a subsegment and besides the main behavior pattern and other specific characteristics that differentiate it from all the other stories that contain BP1, that is a subsegment of BP1. However, regardless of this, all these lines that you see here, the red lines, represent false stories. So one red line is a false story, another red line is another false story. But in reality, there are over 1,000 false stories, so it's impossible for me to truly draw that on the board because there is no space. But this is just a proof of concept. So what is true about all of these false stories is that all of them support each other. Let's use BP1 as an example again, and that means that every new false story that is made up that contains BP1 as the core behavioral element, then that false story supports the entire segment of false stories that contain BP1. That means it's self-explanatory. All false stories that are made up that contain sexual harassment one way or another are included in BP1, and they support obviously all the other false stories that present the same behavior pattern. That's self-explanatory. But this is how society's delusional system is built. In order for each story to support all the other false stories, and all the other false stories to support each new false story. And at the end you have this, CD1. That is the convenient delusion, convenient delusion 1. That is what society wants to be true. That is part of this, of who society wants me to be based on its convenient delusions. And BP1 is just one segment of this desire of society. Society wants me to sexually harass girls. That is convenient to it. It has specific false stories in which that behavior pattern is presented, which, if they are true, society can rationalize its crimes committed against me and reject other crimes committed against me. So for society, that has to be true. Therefore, it made up an entire delusional segment in which I am shown to exhibit that behavior pattern that I never exhibited. And that is how society builds up its delusional system. So you have hundreds of false stories that present the same behavior pattern, even though I never exhibited that behavior pattern. And that is done because society wants that to be true, and because that was rewarded. Making up such a false story was rewarded. Committing the crime of defamation on a global stage in a manner that supported their behavior pattern was rewarded. That is simple. That is how society's delusional system was built up. The same applies to BP2, BP3, BP4, BP5, regardless of what the topic is. So let's assume BP2 represents the behavior pattern of insulting people. That can be divided in many subsegments. There can be racist comments, there can be sexist comments, and so on. But the behavior pattern at the core is the same. Insulting people. It is simple. And the same is with all the other behavior patterns. And after all is done, society chose to do one more thing. It decided to interconnect all behavior patterns and all series of false stories. So for example, like I said, BP1 has its own false series, all the way to BP5. There are more than 5 behavior patterns that are present in society's delusional system. But again, this is just a proof of concept. Here I drew that. I said this is an entire series, so from BP5 to CD5. So all stories that contain the behavior pattern 5 represent a series, and they result in convenient delusion 5. It's the same as with behavior pattern 4 and 3 and 2 and so on. So what did society do afterward? They interconnected all behavior patterns in order for everything to support everything else. And that is also simple, and it was expected, and it is part of a purposeful action of society in order to strengthen its delusional system. And how does this work? How does that work? So you take a false story, one individual false story that contains both behavior pattern 5 and behavior pattern 4. And then you make more false stories to support that specific individual false story. And then you make up additional false stories that all of them contain both behavior pattern 5 and behavior pattern 4. In such a manner that if this is done long enough, a society gets to the conclusion that if behavior 5 is true, behavior 4 is also true. So both behavior patterns will be true. And then society keeps making up false stories in which these two behavior patterns are connected and they're presented in the same series of individual false stories, to the extent that society decides and concludes again that if I exhibit behavior pattern 5, I also exhibit behavior pattern 4. So then the final conclusion is, if Paul is guilty of exhibiting behavior pattern 5, he must also be guilty of exhibiting behavior pattern 4. And this happened regarding everything. So society made up false stories to connect behavior 5 with behavior 4, behavior pattern 3 with behavior pattern 2, behavior pattern 1 with 5, 2 with 3, 4 with 5, and all of them together until the entire delusional system of society became interconnected. And when that happened, it didn't matter what society made up, because regardless of what it made up, it supported everything else. So we have thousands of false stories that support whatever is made up. And that thing, whatever is made up, it supports the entire delusional system of society. Now, there are small inconsistencies for a series of false stories that clearly create a conflict. They are opposite type of false stories, such as one example that was always present was the straight series and the homosexual series. People made up false stories that contain behavior patterns that show the straight behavior and homosexual behavior, and then there was a conflict between those false series. However, there is more of a variety in general. Even those false series are meant to support each other. So even though that seems illogical, that is how this phenomenon works. So everything supports everything else. And in reality, everything is false. So it's not, that is another type of disinformation. Society wants some segments of its delusional system to be true, because it created a reality in which it can choose any segment of its delusional system, and then based on the stories of that segment of its delusional system, it would be able to rationalize everything in psychotic manners and reject most of the crime that it committed against me. So then the option in which everything is false is not even considered to exist, because society cannot accept that he destroyed an innocent good person and committed all this series of atrocities. But that is the main point, and I drew it on the board. Once again, the red lines represent false stories. So from BP1 to BP2, there are false stories that connect the two behavior patterns, the same with BP2 to BP3, and between BP1 and all the others, BP2 and all the others, BP3 and all the others, and so on. So in the end, the entire delusional system of society is interconnected, and everything supports everything else. And most importantly, 100% of things that were said are false. So if you take behavior pattern 1 and you look how many stories it has, it probably has 100 stories, 200 stories, 100% of these stories are false. Not one is true. 100% of them are false. All of them are behavior patterns that I never exhibited. Regardless of what you choose, you will see that 100% of stories are false. And once again, this was proven already in theory. So based on the specific, there is an entire series of videos and reports that prove this to the greatest possible extent. Based on the theory and of how human behavior works and the specific environment that was presented, This was 100% expected. It was 100% expected for everyone to commit these crimes and make up all these false stories in this exact manner. So the theory 100% proves that I'm correct, but then the actual evidence proves that I'm 100% correct as well. And it does so in each and every case. And this is the obstacle that I hit right now. I am not allowed to obtain justice in court. My fundamental human rights, including this one, some of my fundamental human rights, including this one, were illegally stripped away from me in order to prevent the scenario in which I rightfully prove everything and obtain justice in court. And it was done for that exact reason. So the problem is not the lack of evidence, because I can prove everything. The problem is not the law. The problem is that society broke the law in order to prevent me from proving everything in court. And this is ongoing. It is all at the core of this series of atrocities and irreparable injustices, and the creation of this entire delusional system is the illegal stripping of some of my fundamental human rights. And that is it. It is the criminal ego of a guilty society and a guilty government that prevents justice from taking place in a court of law. It is not the lack of evidence, it is not the law, it is the people. The people, the guilty society, the guilty government do not want their victim to prove the truth about the crimes that they committed. It is that simple. And every time the truth is presented, every time common sense is presented, every time evidence is presented, society works forever harder and becomes forever more psychotic in an attempt to reject the truth, to reject evidence, to reject common sense, and consolidate its psychotic delusional system as the truth even more. And if no disinformation tactics are able to achieve that, I simply get censored. And society goes on to consolidate its convenient delusions as the truth anyway. So this is the structure. This is the structure of mass psychosis in this specific context. This is how society's delusion system was built up out of nothing. All of this is completely made up. It has nothing to do with who I am, nothing to do with what I do, nothing to do with what I say. It is completely unrelated to me. However, it is the result of who society wants me to be based on its convenient delusions. It is the result of society's psychopathic actions, sick imagination, and simply sick desires, psychopathic criminal desires. That is what is at the center of this inhumane phenomenon, of this delusional system. It is not who I am, it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with society's wishes, psychopathic desires, on who it has to do with who society wants me to be based on what is convenient to it. All of these behavior patterns, all of these stories are false. I never exhibited any of these behavior patterns. Everything said about me is false. And in a normal context, it doesn't make sense, but in this context, this was 100% expected, simply based on the theory and the environment that was created. And if society finds a way to reject that in psychotic manners, it doesn't matter, because I have the evidence to prove everything. Which is the only reason why justice is not allowed to take place in court, why I am not confronted, why I am not allowed to have access to key information, because once that happens, I'm able to bring the evidence and prove that I'm 100% correct about everything. Once again, silence is a crime. The structure of mass psychosis.